Hello, hello everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about how I go about researching for my historical novels. Historical fiction is a really unique genre in the writing world in that you're taking real life events, real life cultures, real life people, and you're putting that in a fictional setting. It just opens up so many opportunities for amazing character development, for new ideas, all while paying homage to these genuine places, times, and people that actually existed. Geisha Hands, which is my third novel that I published, is a historical fiction. It is a Japanese historical novel set during the Meiji period of Japan. And if y'all check out the description, I do have the link there for the video on how I went about writing this particular book. I do have other historical fictions in my wheelhouse that I am currently working on, not just Japan, but other countries and cultures as well. So super excited to get those out in the world for y'all. Today we are talking about how exactly I do all the research that goes into these particular novels. Because rule number one with writing historical fiction, y'all, is do your research. Do your research. I know I say this in a lot of my videos for a lot of different topics, but it just still stands, y'all. Do your research. I cannot stress that enough. I unfortunately have come across far too many hopeful writers who say that they want to go into historical fiction and they do absolutely no research. Basically, they take some sort of trope or, God forbid, stereotype that they see on TV or that they read in other books or that they just honestly kind of pull out of their own head. They're just kind of making it up as they go along, and they kind of sprinkle in some historical elements, and it just turns out bad. It just really turns out bad, y'all. Even if you are writing something in a fantasy setting, just as I did with Love of the Sea, you still have to do your research. If you are going to pull from existing history or cultural or religious aspects, please do your research and make sure you actually know what you're talking about. Even if you are going to put your own spin on it, it is crucial to know the source that you're drawing from and make sure that it's accurate and that you're not perpetuating any sort of harmful stereotypes. That was a huge thing that I wanted to avoid with Geisha Hands, because one of the number one stereotypes that to this day still exists and is so harmful to the Japanese culture is that people think geisha are courtesans, and they are not. Oiran are courtesans, but over the years, Western society has basically assumed that they are the same thing, and they are not. Geisha are entertainers, and not even in the way that Westerners think of entertainers. They are literally artists. They dance, they play music, they also act as actual representatives, as diplomats. They speak with people who are important, like actual politicians and people in power. They are usually called to any sort of representative event in Japan to help welcome any sort of foreign guests. This is a huge stereotype that unfortunately is pervasive to this day, which is why it is so important to make sure that you recognize if you are writing something that does come from an ugly stereotype, because it is going to make your story just perpetuate that, and it's cringe and it's bad, and please don't do that. I see it far too often, and it is hard to escape from, and sometimes we can do that without even realizing that it is a harmful stereotype until we take the time to do the research on the source and find out what the true story is. I would say, y'all, that is the number one thing for how to research your historical fiction novel is number one, actually research. Don't just assume things. Don't just believe whatever you see on the internet or on TV. Actually do deep dive research and make sure that you are aware of the subject you are covering. Number two, make sure you have a variety of sources, not just with Geisha Hands, but with the other historical fiction novels that I'm working on. Make sure that you have a variety of sources. The internet is wonderful, y'all, and you can find a lot of amazing content on the internet to help you with your research. But you know what? Nothing can beat an actual book when it comes to research. Making sure that you actually get your hands on some books for source material as well is really going to help make sure that you are in fact reading presenting factual information and not perpetuated stereotypes or opinions that have been presented as facts on the internet. And you don't have to necessarily buy books. There are books available free download as PDFs on the internet, as well as support your local library. Librarians are more than happy to help you. They are just the magical wizards of books. You got a super obscure time period that you need to research, they got you. They will find you a stack of books on whatever it is. Make sure that you hit up multiple types of resources when doing your research so that you can make sure that you are indeed knowledgeable on the subject and presenting it in the best way possible. Number 3. Make sure that you narrow down your story into a specific time period and topic. It can be really tempting to cover huge, broad things because if you're anything like me, I'm a huge history buff. I get really excited. I love reading all the things. I love learning all the things. And it can be really hard not to be like, well, I'm going to cram this in here and I'm going to cram that in there and blah, blah, blah. You can just make your story way too long, way too overwhelming, and just be a giant info dump and just not fun for your reader to actually read. Make sure that you are saving all of your pet interest information for yourself and not necessarily just info dumping it into your story. Set parameters for what exactly you're going to cover in your specific book so that you can keep your research. A good example of this is with my novel Geisha Hands. Here's the thing, y'all. I have been researching Japanese history and culture for far more years than even way before I started actually writing this thing in college. I've been researching that stuff for a long time because it is one of my pet interests. So I know a lot about a lot of stuff that has to do with Japan, and I can't fit all of that stuff in one book. I mean, I'd probably try, but the thing would be like a giant tome and it would just be unnecessary and obnoxious and no one's going to read that. I had to narrow it down to what time period I wanted to cover and what topic I wanted to cover. As much as there's a wide range of all of those things that I would love to cover in a book, I had to get specific. So I chose the Meiji period because it is a very finite amount of time in the enormous history of Japan, which is thousands of years, y'all. Like, holy crap, that is a huge amount of time to cover for anything. So we take thousands of years, put it down to little bite-sized time period. Okay, so we've got our time period. And then I picked a topic, the culture of Maiko and Geisha, aka Geisha and Apprentice Geisha. So we picked our topic. We're not just like, oh, we're going to talk about samurai, and we're going to talk about Ronin, and we're going to talk about Geisha, and we're going to talk about calligraphy, and we're going to talk about the military, and you could go on forever. There's so many different topics in even just that one bite-sized piece of the time period. There's so much going on there. You have to zoom in on one little thing and be like, okay, covering this thing. Because let's face it, y'all, there are so many stories out there that will take a very pulled back view, very general view of something and just give you really surfacey facts about a certain time period. There's so much of that already out there. The best way to write a really successful historical fiction novel these days is to pick something specific and really hone in on that in order to give your audience something new, something that they're probably not going to find a whole lot of out there. And yes, from the advent of the very well-known novel, Memoirs of a Geisha, there are several geisha books out there. And there are some wonderful ones that are far more historically accurate than Memoirs of a Geisha. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, Memoirs of a Geisha continues that ugly stereotype that I mentioned earlier, so really not a great resource. But I have found that it is a good gateway resource for people who will actually then read more proper, historically accurate books. And a little gateway to be more interested in a topic sort of thing, so there is merit in that. But it's another one of those books where it takes something specific and grabs your attention on that specific topic. Find something you're really interested in, that niche topic in that niche time period, and focus on that. Because the biggest part of these stories that a lot of people seem to forget about is at the end of the day, it's about the characters. It's about what was it like living in that time period, in that specific place, in that specific topic that you have chosen. What was it actually like to live that in terms of the daily experience. That's what historical fiction novels are really actually about, is so that people can read these books and learn about that time period and that topic, but learning about it in a more digestible and relatable way with relatable characters. So you're going to really do yourself a favor by narrowing your focus that way so that you can really grow these characters and make them as authentic as possible without them being these super surfacey cardboard cutout type of characters that honestly have been pretty prevalent in a lot of older historical fiction novels. So do yourself that favor. Find what it is that really grabs your attention. And if there are things that also grab your attention, other topics, remember, you can always write more than one book. You can always write more. And you know what? People will want more. So having those other topics available at your disposal is a good thing. So don't worry about it. You don't have to say goodbye to them. It's just a temporary, I'll get to you later. Number 4, another really great resource, if you can vet its authenticity, are documentaries. This is often a resource that people forget about when doing research for their historical fiction novels, is that if you've picked a popular topic, there's probably a wealth of documentaries about said topic. These resources are great, not really so much for the information. You're going to find a lot better information resources online as well as at your local library or in physical books. Documentaries are great for getting that human aspect to the story, to be able to actually make your characters feel real and relatable is by watching documentaries, and a lot of times they'll feature interviews by people that lived during that time period, or if it was way back in the before times where we had access to film and all that wonderful stuff, they sometimes will have journal entries or other sorts of interviews or other resources that will showcase what daily life was like. So absolutely be sure to watch documentaries if they're available to you for your topic in order to better establish that human element of your story. Last but not least, the idea of what not to write. Make sure that these small details of your story make sense for the time period that you're writing in. It's super easy to accidentally slip in modern things into a historical fiction without even realizing it. For example, with Geisha Hands, during that time period, I didn't realize that they hadn't mainstreamed cars yet during that time period. While yes, technically cars were starting to be invented at the very, very early stages during that time period, and some of the uber super rich people had access to very early versions of cars, it was not exactly something that you saw roaming around on the streets of Japan. And there were a few scenes that I realized that I had put modern cars into the story, and that just made zero sense for what I was trying to write. And I had to go back and remind myself, no, these people on a regular daily basis used rickshaws. And so catching yourself and making sure that those small details are within the bounds of the time period that you're presenting is so important. And it can be something as small as even using slang in the language in the dialogue, or them just having access to things they shouldn't. It can even be something as drastic as, did they have access to running water? Did they have electricity? What kind of clothes did they wear? How exactly did they deal with the elements in terms of heat and air conditioning and going outside when it was hot or it was cold? What exactly did they do to keep themselves warm or keep themselves cool? All those kind of details, those are the kind of details where a lot of people will slip up and accidentally add in modern things that just don't belong. Make sure that not only you're doing your due diligence with putting details in that are historically accurate, but also look for the ones that you need to take out that are not historically accurate. Now, obviously, unless you're one of those people who are just super uber tried and true, and you're going to make every single inch of this book as historically accurate as possible, down to you're going to make sure the actual language is going to be as close as possible with all of the jargon and all of the slang and all of that particular time period. I mean, go you. That is an endeavor, y'all. That is commendable. Not necessary, but absolutely commendable. You don't have to go necessarily to that extreme, but make sure your French people in the 1800s aren't suddenly talking to each other on their cell phones, because that's not a thing. Also, make sure that your English infantry are not exactly blasting each other with modern warfare technology that they simply didn't have when they basically had muskets at best. So Make sure that you get all of those details right with your research. And again, watching documentaries will also really help get you into that mindset of that time period and give you a better idea of how they live basic challenges of everyday life during that time period so that you don't have those simple little flub ups. It's been a long journey with writing geisha hands, and it is still yet a long journey with the historical fiction novels that I do currently have on my to-do list. And that's another big thing to remember is that oftentimes it takes longer to write a historical fiction novel than it does your average book because you're doing a wealth of research at the same time as writing it. Geisha Hands took me a full 5 years to complete. That's researching, writing, and illustrating. I was also lucky in that I was able to basically streamline my research because, as I previously mentioned, I did a lot of pet research way before I wrote this book. So I already had a lot of knowledge on hand, and a lot of the research that I did was either doing a far more detailed research into particular things, or it was just verifying that, again, the subject that I was talking about was indeed accurate and that I wasn't promoting any stereotypes or anything from an incorrect time period. Take that into account. If you feel like this novel is just dragging on, don't worry. That's normal. It's going to feel that way, especially in the initial research stage. So hang in there, it's worth it, I can promise you. I hope this video was helpful. Please do leave me in the comments. Let me know what time periods that y'all love reading and writing about. And also, if you've got a work in progress, tell me all about it in the comments because I would love to hear about it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye!